Hola a todos.
Hello everyone.
Bienvenidos a
Welcome to one of the first
pasos para
steps
cambiar
toward
la
changing the history they sought to prostitute,
historia que quisieron prostituir cambiando los nombres
changing names and besmirching the great
ensuciando a los
heroes
grandes
of this
héroes de esta
nation.
patria. Es un placer
It is
estar
a
aquí con
pleasure
todos
to be
ustedes
here with all of
inaugurando el
you
Palacio
inaugurating
Libertad,
the Domingo
Domingo
Faustino Sarmiento Libertad Palace.
Quizás para algunos sea solo un simple cambio de
Perhaps for
nombre.
some it is just a simple name
Para nosotros
change,
es el inicio de
but
una
for us
nueva
it is the
etapa
beginning
donde
of a new
enaltecemos
era
la
where we
figura
exalt
de
the
nuestros
figures
más
of our
grandes
greatest heroes
próceres
and national
y símbolos
symbols.
nacionales,
To leave behind the cult of politicians who dragged the country into decadence and humiliation. Taking this opportunity, I would like to commemorate today 156 years since Domingo Faustino Sarmiento took office as President of Argentina. His presidency ranks among the most important in our history because it was fundamental to the consolidation of our nation. Sarmiento took over a country with a 90% illiteracy rate, built 1,800 schools, and quadrupled the student population. As a result of his educational approach and the economic progress that liberal generation ensured, a few decades later, Argentina became the first nation in human history to eradicate illiteracy. In other words, we literally created civilization out of barbarism. Without a doubt, Sarmiento was the first thinker to develop the theory of human capital, which both liberals and, for example, Professor Espert, admire so much in Gary Becker, who embodied it in microeconomic analysis. Despite the important role Sarmiento played in our history, those who dare to question him today, after his death, seek to establish an absurd historical revisionism about his figure and presence, rejecting his enormous legacy, just as they attempted to do with Roca and many other heroes of that generation. The same people who carried out the attempt to demonize the father of the classroom are the same people who now seek to rend their garments for education and take students hostage in their desperate attempts to maintain their privileges. And these same people also promoted the cultural, social, and economic model that has held Argentina back in recent decades. Just to put it in figures, so you can see the disaster they've caused by contaminating socialism and everything they touch. Based on the 2023 Aprender tests, we now know that nearly 40% of elementary school children perform poorly in language and nearly 50% poorly in math. In secondary school, of those who complete the level, 8 out of 10 have reading comprehension problems. They don't understand what they read. And of those who finish, only 4 can't understand a text. Consequently, if we add to that the problems we have in terms of nutrition and poverty, to the point that 7 out of 10 children aged 0 to 14 are poor, they are putting a very bad focus on the end of their educational career. When we have problems developing basic human capital, because children don't eat and, at the same time, can't study later. However, they continue to pursue the same model that failed more than 100 years ago, something we came to put an end to and put the nation back on its feet. Throughout the campaign, you've heard me say that we prefer an inconvenient truth to an uncomfortable lie. The inconvenient truth in Argentina is that the national public university serves no one but the children of the upper class and the children of the upper middle class. In a country where the vast majority of children are poor, where they can't read, write, or perform basic math, the myth of free university becomes a subsidy from the poor to the rich. whose children are the only ones who reach university with the resources, the culture, and the time necessary to study. The university has ceased to be a tool for social mobility and has become an obstacle to it. If those who defend universities truly believed in social mobility, they would follow Sarmiento's example. Instead of defending a university for the rich, they would defend early childhood education for all. Furthermore, they could allow an audit. Because the issue of free public universities isn't at stake here, it's not up for discussion, it's not part of the discussion. The discussion is that resources are scarce, and under any slogan, stealing is always wrong. We want to end the leaks of money that comes into the university and what actually reaches the students and professors, and not what's left in the middle, for example, with expensive cars worth $90,000 and tremendous drivers who earn 13 million pesos. That's why we want to audit them. Not because we want to close the universities, as people are being lied to, but because we also want to protect them by protecting their resources, and for that, they must be audited. But as I said at the beginning of this revelation, if they don't want to be audited, it must be because they're dirty. Therefore, gentlemen, stop deceiving the Argentines and tell them the truth. They don't want to be audited to keep their jobs. And in this way, they use and prostitute a noble cause to continue defending the theft of some political groups. Therefore, when we finish with these thieves, criminals, and liars, we will once again be facing true upward social mobility. But the reality is that they are not interested in social mobility or education. They are only interested in their coffers to maintain their privileges, while they raise noble flags that allow them to atone for their sins. Well, we are interested in progress. In fact, I have mentioned several times that, as an economist, I have decided to specialize in economic growth. Let's say the first formal model, so to speak, and tested, aside from the fact that Adam Smith had developed a model and various authors had developed it, but the one who formally embodied the model was Robert Solow, in 1956, who tested it in 1957. The model only explained 15% of growth. Then, from the University of Chicago, George Stigler, who was the head of the economics department, said, "The problem is that the model doesn't map because it omits human capital." And from there, two lines of human capital analysis emerged. On the one hand, the macroeconomic line, which was led by Ozawa, who was the thesis advisor of one of the greatest economists in Argentine history, Miguel Sidriuski, and who, moreover, also guided Robert Lucas Jr., who won, precisely, the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1987. On the other hand, there is the microeconomic human capital line, which was developed by Gary Becker. That debate, however, was dominated by the MIT line, by Samuelson and Solow, and only the idea of exogenous technological progress was considered, which is why that literature fell into ostracism, into oblivion, until, already in the late 1970s, Robert Lucas Jr. began to argue that the real question in economics was economic growth. He took up Adam Smith's legacy and tried to explain economic growth. The one who found his way around it in 1983 was a Chicago graduate named Paul Romer. And from there, the theory of endogenous growth was built, generating a great debate, a debate that, for economic theory, was basically settled in 1989 with an article by David Romer, Weil, and Mankiw. Guess what they discovered? That when they factor in economic growth, they explain 90% of what happens in a country's economic growth. In other words, if anyone is convinced of the importance of human capital, it's me. If there's anyone convinced of the value of education, it's me. And that's why I created the Ministry of Human Capital. Stop lying, criminals who don't want to be audited. That's why, today, 156 years after the presidential inauguration, I want to reaffirm that Sarmiento remains one of our great leaders, despite Julio Argentino Roca, Urquiza, Mitre, Avellaneda, Pellegrini, and, above all, Juan Bautista Alberti's displeasure, because we have the titanic task of re-establishing the foundations for the nation's economic, social, and cultural development. Just as that generation of patriots did, which are nothing less than the foundations for the full exercise of freedom for every Argentine. That is the only way to honor our heroes, with work worthy of theirs, which puts the country on the path to prosperity once again. And we will not stop until we achieve it. To those who wish to attack the ideas of freedom, which are, without a doubt, the ideas of progress, I remind them of what Sarmiento said when he was forced into exile by the intolerance and proscription of the Rosista tyranny. Ideas cannot be killed. Therefore, God bless the Argentines, may the forces of heaven be with us, and long live freedom, damn it. Long live freedom, damn it. Long live freedom, damn it. Thank you very much.